What if you were forced to give up the dog you loved so much, only to find out that the buyer's reason for purchasing it would forever change both of your lives? What if that decision, which felt like the hardest thing you've ever done, was actually the beginning of something much greater than you ever imagined? Sarah sat quietly in her small, dimly lit living room, the warm afternoon sun casting shadows across the worn rug. Her German shepherd, Max, lay at her feet, his head resting on the floor, eyes half closed in contentment. For years, Max had been her constant companion, a loyal friend who never judged her and always stood by her side. He had been with her through thick and thin, the good days when life felt full of promise and the bad days when the weight of the world seemed unbearable. But now, Sarah was facing a crossroads. Her life had taken a turn she never expected. The bills piled up, the car was on its last leg, and her job at the local diner barely covered the essentials. And now, the news hit her like a freight train. The house she had rented for years was being sold, and she had to move. The thought of leaving Max behind, the one living thing that had kept her grounded, was a pain she could barely bear. She hadn't planned on it, but the decision had been made. She'd placed an ad in the local paper, something she never imagined she'd do. Selling Max was the only option left. The only option that could bring in enough money to help her move on, to start fresh. The idea of it tore her apart, but she knew she had no choice. She loved him too much to keep him in a situation that was unstable, to drag him into a new life that could be just as hard, maybe harder. Max deserved better. The day the buyer arrived, Sarah stood at the door, her hands trembling, not sure what to expect. The man who had answered the ad was punctual and polite, but something about him seemed off. He had an aura of calmness, yet his eyes, there was something in them that made Sarah hesitate. He seemed eager, but not in the way she expected. He introduced himself as Daniel, a man with a quiet demeanor and a look of someone who had seen more than his fair share of hardship. His voice was steady, yet there was a certain haunted quality to it. He didn't ask the usual questions about Max's breed or health. Instead, he asked about the dog's temperament, about how he handled stress, about his past. It was as if he already knew more about Max than he was letting on. As they spoke, Sarah couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of unease. But she pushed it aside, telling herself that this was the best for Max. Still, as Daniel left with the dog, she felt the weight of what she had just done. What she didn't know, what neither she nor Max could possibly know at that moment, was that this decision, this seemingly heart-wrenching goodbye, was the beginning of a journey neither of them could have ever imagined. A journey that would not only change Max's life but her own, in ways they couldn't yet understand. Sarah sat in the worn armchair by the window, staring out at the empty street. It was the same view she had gazed at for years, but now it felt different, as though the world outside was closing in on her. The past few months had been nothing but a blur of mounting bills, unanswered phone calls, and a constant nagging sense of fear that she could no longer push away. Her job at the diner barely kept food on the table, and the landlord's letter about the house being sold had sealed her fate. She had tried to fight it. Sarah had done everything she could to make ends meet, taking on extra shifts, cutting back on luxuries, and even borrowing from her sister, though that left her feeling guilty and ashamed. But nothing worked. She couldn't keep up anymore. Max, her German shepherd, had been her constant companion through it all. He was there through the long, lonely nights when she cried herself to sleep, and he was there during the small victories when she managed to pay a bill or get through the week without falling apart. Max wasn't just a pet, he was her family. Yet she had reached a breaking point. The house was being sold, and she had to leave. It wasn't just a matter of finding a new place, it was about starting over. Sarah was torn between the reality of her own survival and the painful truth that she couldn't afford to keep Max anymore. She couldn't take him with her to the new apartment. It wasn't a big enough space, and it was too expensive. The thought of him being cooped up in a tiny apartment, unable to run freely in the yard, tore at her heart. But the alternative, giving him up, felt like a betrayal. Max had been there for her when no one else was, and now, in her time of need, She was about to make the hardest decision of her life. Could she really let him go? The tears that blurred her vision were a constant reminder of how deeply she loved him. But sometimes, love meant making sacrifices, even if it broke your heart. Max had been more than just a dog to Sarah. He had been her protector, her confidant, and her source of comfort. She had adopted him when he was just a pup, and from the moment he bounded into her life with his soft fur and big brown eyes, she knew he would be her companion through thick and thin. They had shared so many moments together, some joyful, others painful. He had been there when she moved into the small apartment, eager and curious, wagging his tail as if to say, "We're in this together." He had stood by her side when she received the heartbreaking news of her mother's death, sensing her pain and curling up beside her for hours, offering silent comfort without a word. He was the first to greet her after long shifts, always ready to listen to the day's frustrations, never judging, just offering his calm presence. But it wasn't just the bad times that defined their bond. There were the quiet mornings when they would go on long walks through the neighborhood, Max trotting beside her, his leash held loosely in Sarah's hand. They had an unspoken understanding, a rhythm. Max would nudge her gently when he wanted to explore a new scent, and she would smile, letting him lead the way. Their connection was deep, built on years of shared moments, and it was hard to imagine life without him. Now, with everything falling apart, Sarah couldn't bear the thought of losing him. How could she ask him to leave? Max had been her rock, her only consistent companion in a world that felt increasingly uncertain. The idea of giving him up, of letting him go to a new home where she wouldn't be there to watch over him, seemed unbearable. It felt like she was losing a piece of herself. As the days passed, Sarah's heartache grew, but so did her understanding that this was what was best for Max. He deserved more than she could give him. She didn't want him to suffer in a cramped apartment. She didn't want him to feel neglected as she struggled to make ends meet. But the choice still felt like a knife in her chest. One evening, after another long day of stress and exhaustion, Sarah sat down at the kitchen table, the pen trembling in her hand. The ad she had been avoiding was finally in front of her. A simple but heartbreaking message. German Shepherd, 5 years old, great companion, looking for a loving home. Her heart felt like it was shattering with every word she wrote. She paused for a moment, her hand hovering over the paper, as if waiting for the perfect words to come. But there were no perfect words. There was nothing that could make this decision feel less painful. She had to do this. She had to let go of the one constant that had kept her grounded for so long. With a heavy sigh, she finished the ad and placed it in the local newspaper's classified section. The weight of the action was crushing, but she knew it was the only way. Max deserved more than what she could offer him right now. She loved him too much to hold him back from the life he deserved. As she hit send and posted the ad online, Sarah felt a strange sense of emptiness wash over her. It was done. There was no turning back. She hoped the right person would come along, someone who could see Max for what he truly was, a hero in his own right, a loyal friend, and a companion who would offer as much love as he received. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at Max, who was resting peacefully by the door, unaware of the decision she had just made. He lifted his head, his ears twitching at the sound of her soft sobs. His eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, Sarah knew that she had done this for him. This wasn't about her. It was about giving him the chance to find happiness, even if it meant saying goodbye. The knock on the door was sharp and quick, breaking Sarah's silence. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears away, and forced a smile as she opened the door. Standing in front of her was a man, tall, wearing a faded military jacket, with a few visible scars that seemed to tell their own story. His hair was neatly kept, but there was a certain weariness in his eyes, as if he carried the weight of years of unsaid things. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he just stood there, looking at her with an intensity that felt both calm and distant at the same time. His posture was straight, but his shoulders seemed to hold the quiet weight of someone who had seen too much and said too little. "Sarah," he asked after a pause, his voice steady but low. Yes, Sarah replied, her voice wavering just slightly. She could tell immediately that this wasn't the typical buyer. Something about him felt different. He wasn't like the casual pet owner, eager to meet a new companion. Instead, there was a quiet urgency in his demeanor. He extended his hand, and she shook it, noticing that his grip was firm but not overly warm. His fingers were rough, weathered by hard work or perhaps something else. As they stood there in the doorway, Sarah couldn't help but notice how his eyes kept flicking toward Max, who was resting by the door, his ears perked up in curiosity. The man's gaze softened when he saw the dog, but he didn't smile. Instead, there was something else in his expression, something Sarah couldn't quite place. "Can I meet him?" the man asked, his voice calm, but with an unmistakable edge of anticipation. He seemed so eager and yet so reserved. It made Sarah's stomach tighten with a sense of unease. He was excited, but it wasn't the usual joy or warmth she'd expected. It was as if he needed to meet the dog for a reason deeper than just companionship. Sarah stepped aside, letting him into the living room. The man's eyes immediately fell on Max, who was now standing, his tail slowly wagging in response to the visitor's presence. The dog was always wary of strangers, but he seemed calm, watching the man closely. "You've had him a long time?" the man asked, his eyes not leaving the dog as he knelt down, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. 5 years, Sarah answered, watching him carefully. "He's been a part of my life since he was a pup." The buyer didn't ask about Max's breed, his age, or his medical history, things Sarah had expected. Instead, he simply asked, "How does he handle stress?" "Stress," Sarah repeated, a bit caught off guard. "Well, he's had his moments, like any dog. But he's loyal, good temperament. He's been through a lot, though, and I think he's happy with me." The man nodded, his gaze never leaving Max. "Does he protect you? In case of danger?" Sarah blinked. It was an unusual question. She didn't know how to respond, so she nodded cautiously. "He's protective, yes. He's always been there for me." The man stood up slowly, then turned to her. His expression was serious now, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "I've had experience with dogs like this," he said, almost cryptically. "Dogs who've been through more than just the ordinary life. I think he'll be able to help me. He has a lot of potential." His tone was calm, but there was something unsettling about his lack of further details. What did he mean by, "help me"? Sarah couldn't put her finger on it, but something didn't sit right with her. He wasn't asking the usual questions about the dog's needs, or how he would adjust to his new environment. Instead, he seemed focused on something else, something deeper. She was curious, but didn't feel it was her place to ask. Still, as she watched him kneel again beside Max, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just finding a new home for a pet. As the conversation continued, Sarah began to notice more subtle clues that only deepened her suspicions. The man seemed to avoid eye contact when she asked about his life, his background, his reasons for needing a dog like Max. When she gently probed, asking if he had pets before or what he planned on doing with Max, he offered vague answers. "I've had dogs before," he said briefly, his voice almost distant. "This one's different. He has what I need." Sarah frowned. "What exactly is it that you need?" she asked, feeling the curiosity building in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was her own doubt or the man's unease, but something about his responses didn't add up. "I've been through some things," he replied, his tone suddenly colder. "I'm not the best at talking about it, but I know what a dog like this can do for someone like me." The shift in his demeanor was subtle, but it was enough to make Sarah pause. Why was he so guarded? Why didn't he want to talk more about his own story? She couldn't help but wonder if he was hiding something. The feeling that this was more than just a transaction lingered in the air, thick with unspoken words. She could sense it in the way he kept glancing at Max, like he wasn't just looking at a dog, but a solution to something personal. His discomfort, coupled with the vague answers, made Sarah more unsure by the minute. She couldn't shake the thought that there was something important that the man wasn't telling her. Finally, after a long silence, the man stood up from his crouched position, his eyes lingering on Max. There was a weight in the air, and Sarah could feel the tension thickening between them. It was then that he spoke again, his voice much softer, almost vulnerable. "I know this might sound strange, but I'm a veteran. I've seen things that still haunt me. Max, well, he's not just any dog. I know what he's been through. He's been trained for something bigger than just being a companion. He's a service dog." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea. All this time, she had thought Max was just a stray she'd rescued, but now, in this moment, everything started to make sense. The dog's presence, his loyalty, his calmness despite the chaos of her life, it wasn't just coincidence. Max had been trained for something special. "I don't just need him to be a dog," the man continued, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I need him to help me heal. He's trained to support people like me, veterans who've been through war, who live with PTSD. I've tried other ways to cope, but nothing works like a dog who understands, who's been through it all." The words hung in the air, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary adoption. Max wasn't just a pet. He was a healer, a protector, a symbol of hope for someone who had given so much of himself. The realization hit her like a wave. Max's purpose wasn't just to stay by her side, it was to help others, to be the strength they couldn't find in themselves. For a moment, Sarah felt a deep pang of sadness, but also an overwhelming sense of pride. She had given him the chance to heal, and now he would heal someone else. The weight of the decision, the pain of saying goodbye, suddenly felt a little lighter. Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. I understand," she said softly, looking at Max, who was now sitting quietly, his eyes on the man with an unmistakable sense of recognition. The man smiled, a hint of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice breaking the silence. "You don't know what this means." As Sarah watched him lead Max out the door, she realized that the dog's journey wasn't over. It was just beginning, and it would be a journey that touched lives in ways she had never imagined. The air between Sarah and the buyer grew heavy with unspoken words as they stood in her living room. Max had quietly moved to sit at the man's feet, his tail wagging ever so slightly as if recognizing something in him. The silence stretched on, and it was clear that the moment had arrived for the buyer to reveal why he was so determined to take the dog. "I don't think you really know what he's capable of," the buyer began, his voice breaking the silence. He was speaking softly now, almost as if to himself, but Sarah could sense the weight of what he was about to say. "Max isn't just a regular dog. He's a service dog, a military working dog," he continued, his eyes now focused on the German Shepherd. "He was trained to help soldiers, to keep them safe. He's been through hell and back, just like I have." Sarah felt her chest tighten. She had no idea. For a moment, she couldn't even find the words to respond. I didn't know," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. She felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow, pride that Max had been so much more than she realized, and sorrow that she hadn't been the one to understand the depth of his purpose. The buyer went on, his voice steady but with a touch of vulnerability. "I'm a veteran. I served overseas and, well, I've seen things that still haunt me. I've been dealing with PTSD for a while now. I've tried everything, therapy, medication, but nothing works like the bond between a soldier and his dog." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was something completely unexpected. The buyer wasn't just interested in Max as a pet. He needed him. "I've had dogs before, but nothing like this," the man continued, his eyes flicking back to Sarah. "When I heard about him, when I learned what he'd been through, I knew I had to bring him home. He has the training, the instincts that can help someone like me. He's not just a dog, he's a hero." The words hung in the air, and Sarah struggled to make sense of them. She had never seen Max as anything more than a companion, a loyal friend who was always there for her. But this revelation was changing everything. Max had been through something extraordinary, a past full of challenges, a past full of trauma, just like the buyer. "I wasn't looking for a dog to just keep me company," the buyer said, his voice softer now. "I was looking for a partner. Someone who could help me fight this battle. And I think Max is the one who can do that." The weight of his words settled on Sarah's chest like a heavy stone. This wasn't just about a dog being sold to a new home. Max had a calling, a role to play that Sarah hadn't fully understood before. Sarah stood frozen, her mind racing as she processed the buyer's words. Everything she had thought she knew about Max, the dog she had loved and cared for, was suddenly turned upside down. Max wasn't just a dog, he was a trained hero with a mission. He had been through more than Sarah had ever realized, and now he was being called to do something far greater than just provide companionship. She felt stunned, her heart heavy with confusion. How had she not known? How had she been so blind to what Max had truly been through? And why hadn't the military told her about his past? There was so much Sarah hadn't understood about the dog who had been by her side for so long. As the buyer spoke, explaining his need for Max's specialized skills, Sarah's emotions were torn in two directions. She still felt the gut-wrenching pain of having to let him go, but now she saw Max's true value, not just as a companion for her, but as a source of strength and healing for someone else who truly needed him. She thought about all the years they had spent together, the bond they had formed, and the way he had helped her through the darkest times of her life. Max had been a constant when nothing else seemed certain. But now she had to face the truth. He was meant for something bigger. He was meant to help someone else heal, just as he had helped her. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she thought about the decision she had made just days before. Selling Max had felt like an unbearable betrayal. Now it felt like she was sending him on a mission, one that only he could fulfill. But it didn't make the goodbye any easier. She looked at Max, who was still sitting quietly by the buyer's side, his eyes soft but alert. He seemed to sense that something had changed in the air, but he didn't move. It was as if he, too, understood the importance of what was happening. Sarah's internal struggle intensified. She was happy that Max would be going to someone who understood him, who valued him for more than just his company. But she also felt a sharp pang of guilt. She wasn't ready to let him go. She wasn't ready to give up on the life they had built together. But as the buyer looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and sincerity, Sarah knew, deep down, that this was the right thing for Max. "I've been through so much," the buyer said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "And Max, he's my last chance. I know he can help me. He'll be my companion, my protector, just like he was trained to be. He's not just a dog. He's my chance to heal." Sarah nodded slowly, her heart aching. This wasn't just a pet. Max was a soldier, a hero, and now he was going to help someone who truly needed him. She understood that even if it broke her heart. As Sarah stood there, her emotions swirling in a storm of love, guilt, and a strange sense of peace, the buyer explained why Max's presence was so crucial to him. The dog wasn't just a companion. He was a healer, a protector, and someone who could offer comfort in a way nothing else could. "The bond between a soldier and his dog is unlike anything else," the buyer said, his voice filled with reverence. "I've lost people. I've seen things I can't forget. But Max, he's been through it too. He understands what it's like to be broken, to see things no one should ever see. And he can help me heal. He'll remind me that I'm not alone." Sarah listened in silence, her heart heavy with emotion. She had never considered the depth of the dog's role in someone else's life. To her, Max was just the dog who had kept her company, the dog who had followed her through the ups and downs of life. But now, she realized that Max had always been more. He was a warrior, trained, loyal, and capable of offering so much more than just affection. The buyer's words sank in deeply, and Sarah felt a profound shift in her understanding of Max's purpose. This wasn't just about selling him to a new home, it was about giving him the chance to fulfill his true legacy. Max wasn't just a pet. He was a hero, and he was about to play a role in someone else's recovery, helping them face their own battles, just as he had helped Sarah face hers. "I never knew," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She looked at Max, who was now standing beside the buyer, his tail wagging softly. She had always known he was special, but she hadn't realized just how special until this moment. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a life changer. The buyer smiled gently, his eyes filled with gratitude. "He's going to help me, Sarah. I can promise you that. He's going to be more than just a dog to me." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision shift. She had made the right choice. Max was meant for something greater, and he was going to be part of a new journey, one that would help the buyer heal and reclaim the parts of himself he had lost. And for the first time, Sarah felt a sense of peace. She was letting go, not because she had to, but because she was giving Max the chance to do what he was truly meant to do. Max's past was a shadow of glory and sacrifice, a story that Sarah could never have imagined when she first laid eyes on him. Before he became her loyal companion, Max was known by another name, Rex, a highly trained military working dog. Rex's early years were spent on a military base, where he was bred and trained for one singular purpose: to serve alongside soldiers in high-risk environments. From a young age, it was clear that he had something special. He was swift, intelligent, and instinctively protective. He underwent grueling training in tracking, protection, detection, and search and rescue operations. His bond with his handlers was immediate and unbreakable, and he quickly became an invaluable asset to the team. During his service, Rex was deployed to several war zones, each mission more dangerous than the last. In the heat of battle, he showed an unyielding bravery, charging into enemy lines without hesitation to protect his human companions. He was part of multiple high-stakes missions, where his senses and instincts saved countless lives. Whether it was sniffing out explosives before they could harm his team or chasing down hostile forces in the dark, Rex was always there, leading the way with unwavering loyalty. One mission stood out among the rest. During a night operation in Afghanistan, Rex was part of a unit tasked with locating a hidden weapons cache deep in the mountains. As they approached the target, an ambush was set. The sound of gunfire pierced the night air, and chaos erupted. Rex's handler, Major Harrison, was injured in the initial attack, but Rex's quick thinking saved his life. The dog grabbed Harrison by the sleeve of his jacket, pulling him away from the line of fire and guiding him to safety. Though the operation was successful, it came at a great cost. Rex's handler, Major Harrison, was seriously wounded, and Rex, too, had sustained injuries. He was retired from active duty soon after. But while Harrison went to the hospital to recover, Rex was sent to the rear, where he was left to face the next chapter of his life, civilian life. After his retirement, Rex's life became a quiet, uncertain one. The military had no place for retired service dogs like him, and he was deemed expendable. But his journey didn't end in an adoption center. Instead, after being passed from one shelter to another, Rex found his way into Sarah's life. Sarah had adopted him from a local rescue group, unaware of the dog's storied past. At the time, she thought she was simply giving a dog a second chance. What she didn't know was that she was adopting a hero, someone who had seen and endured more than most people ever would. Sarah never suspected that Max, or Rex as he had been known, was anything other than a regular dog. To her, he was just a loyal companion, a big-hearted German shepherd who had been through some rough patches in his past, just like her. They connected instantly when she first brought him home. His large, expressive eyes seemed to understand her every word, and his quiet presence made her feel less alone in a world that was often cold and unforgiving. Max's behavior seemed odd at times. He was quick to react to loud noises, always alert, and extremely protective of her. He would bark fiercely at strangers and growl whenever someone came too close. But she attributed that to him simply being a rescue dog. He had likely been through a lot before, and it made sense that he would be wary of unfamiliar faces. Still, she never thought to look deeper. When she first brought him to her home, Sarah made the assumption that he had been trained to be a guard dog or just had an unusually strong instinct to protect. She figured his behaviors were just quirks, nothing out of the ordinary for a dog who had probably lived through difficult circumstances. She never asked about his past, never thought to inquire where he came from or what he had done before. She was just grateful that he was there with her. It wasn't until the buyer arrived, with his cryptic comments and strange questions, that Sarah began to understand the gravity of Max's past. His reaction to the buyer was different from any other dog she had known. Max had an inherent understanding of what was happening, and his calm demeanor around the buyer, though still protective, felt like something deeper. That was when she began to question the full extent of Max's history. As the buyer revealed more about Max's true nature and purpose, Sarah's understanding shifted. It became clear that Max was not just a pet, he was a hero. His behaviors, his protective instincts, his deep connection to people, it all made sense now. Max had been trained for a higher calling, and Sarah had unknowingly been the caretaker of a living testament to bravery and loyalty. The buyer, Daniel, revealed that he had known Rex long before he had found Sarah. He had been stationed overseas as a young soldier, and it was during his service that he first met Rex, then a working dog under the command of Major Harrison. "I worked with Rex during my first tour," Daniel said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "We were part of a unit that was deployed to a hot zone in Afghanistan. I was part of the team that Rex saved that night. He wasn't just a dog to me, he was my partner. We went through hell together." Sarah's eyes widened, her heart swelling with both pride and sorrow as Daniel continued. "I was injured during that mission, shrapnel to the leg. But Rex, he pulled me out of the line of fire. He saved my life. I owe him everything." Daniel's gaze softened as he looked at Max, who was now sitting beside him, seemingly relaxed but alert. "After I got back home, I lost track of him. I didn't know where he went, but I always wondered. I knew that one day I'd find him and I'd bring him home. He's not just a dog, Sarah. He's family. He's my brother." As Daniel spoke, Sarah could feel the depth of the bond between him and Max. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, an unbreakable connection forged through shared trauma and survival. It was clear now that this wasn't just about adopting a dog. It was about honoring a life saved and a partnership that had been lost but never forgotten. The revelation hit Sarah hard. She realized that Max's service wasn't just a job. It was part of a legacy of heroism, loyalty, and sacrifice. The dog she had thought of as a mere companion was, in fact, a part of a soldier's story. "I've been looking for him for years," Daniel said quietly. "When I heard about Max, I knew I had to find him. He's the last piece of that chapter in my life, and I can't let him go. I don't want him to be forgotten. He deserves to have his story told." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding the weight of his words. She had thought she was giving Max a new home, but in reality, she was giving him the chance to return to his true family. As the man's voice softened, she realized just how deeply connected Max was to his past, and just how important he still was, not only to Daniel, but to the world. Sarah sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she looked at Max. Now Rex, lying by the door, his eyes soft and full of unspoken understanding. She had spent so many years with him, through every up and down, every moment of joy and sorrow. The thought of saying goodbye, of letting him go to someone else, felt impossible. He had been her constant, her rock, the one who never wavered when everything else around her felt unstable. Her mind replayed all the moments they had shared, the long walks in the park, the quiet nights by the fire, the way he would nudge her when she was feeling down, his comforting presence when she cried. He had been with her through the toughest of times, the lonely nights when she wondered if things would ever get better. He had never asked for anything in return except for her love and care. But as the days went by, Sarah began to realize something. Max's needs had changed. He was no longer just a companion. He had a deeper purpose, one that she couldn't fulfill on her own. She had seen it in his eyes when the buyer had arrived, in the way Max had responded to him. There was an understanding between them, something that transcended the ordinary bond of pet and owner. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked at Max. She couldn't deny it any longer. He deserved more than she could provide. He needed someone who understood his purpose, someone who could help him fulfill the role he was always meant to play. She wasn't just giving up her dog, she was giving him a chance to do what he had been trained to do. The decision was excruciating, and Sarah's heart felt like it was breaking with every passing second. But as she looked at Max, she understood. She understood that this wasn't just about her. It was about him, about his future, his healing, his ability to help someone who needed him just as much as she had. Max slowly got up from the floor and padded over to her, his large head resting gently on her knee. Sarah placed her hand on his soft fur, running her fingers through it as she whispered, "I'll never forget you, Max. You've given me everything. I hope you find the peace you deserve." In that moment, Sarah felt a mixture of sorrow and peace. She was letting go, but she wasn't losing him. She was simply giving him a chance to become the hero he was always meant to be. Max's transition to his new life was not an easy one, but it was one that would prove to be transformative for both him and Daniel. The first few days after Max joined Daniel were filled with uncertainty and adjustment. Max, who had been used to the quiet life with Sarah, had to learn how to navigate his new role as a companion and emotional support animal. At first, Max seemed unsure. He wasn't quite the confident protector he had been in his military days. He was a little more reserved, a little more hesitant, as if he was still processing the change. But as the days passed, something began to shift. Daniel, who had been struggling with PTSD after his own time in the military, was beginning to feel a sense of comfort from Max's presence. One evening, as Daniel sat on the couch, the weight of the day pressing down on him, Max walked over to him, sat at his feet, and laid his head on Daniel's lap. It wasn't a trained response, but something more, something instinctual. Daniel looked down at the dog, feeling the warmth of his body, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of calm. Max's presence seemed to provide something that therapy and medication hadn't been able to do. He brought a sense of grounding. When Daniel would wake up from nightmares, covered in sweat and shaking, Max was there. His protective instincts kicked in, and he would nudge Daniel's hand with his nose, a silent gesture of reassurance that things would be okay. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to trust Max more. He started taking the dog out on long walks in the neighborhood, their bond growing stronger with every step. Max would stay close, always aware of his surroundings, ready to protect Daniel if needed, but also offering the kind of quiet comfort that only a dog could provide. One particularly hard night, Daniel was battling with overwhelming memories of the past. He felt the weight of it all, his struggles, the things he had seen, the lives lost. But as he sank into his thoughts, he felt a familiar weight at his feet. Max had curled up beside him, his large, warm body offering a kind of silent strength. For the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't feel so alone. Max was not just providing protection, he was offering the space for healing. Every day, Daniel found a little more peace, and with each passing moment, Max's transformation was complete. He was no longer just a retired military dog. He was a companion, a partner, and a source of emotional support that Daniel desperately needed. The bond between Daniel and Max deepened in ways neither of them could have anticipated. At first, Daniel had been unsure of how the dog would adapt to his new life, just as Max had been unsure of his new role. But as the days passed, it became clear that they were both healing in their own way, together. Max had always been a protector, but now he was a protector of a different kind. Daniel's anxiety and PTSD had been the main obstacles in his life, and Max's presence became the constant source of comfort that helped him navigate the emotional turmoil. Whenever Daniel would experience a flashback or panic attack, Max was there, instinctively standing by his side, offering the kind of calming presence that Daniel had never experienced before. One night, as Daniel lay in bed, the weight of the past pressing down on him, He felt his heart race. His breathing became shallow, and he began to relive the trauma of his past deployment. But before the darkness could fully take over, Max jumped up onto the bed, lying down beside him and resting his head on Daniel's chest. In that moment, Max's presence was the anchor Daniel needed to pull himself back to the present. Slowly, his breathing steadied, and the panic subsided. There was no need for words. Max understood. And for Daniel, that understanding meant everything. The bond between them wasn't just about healing from their respective wounds. It was about shared experience. Daniel had been through battles, both on the field and within himself. And now Max, too, was facing his own battle, but together, they were learning how to find peace. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Daniel could feel the weight of his past lightening little by little. Max had helped him reclaim a sense of normalcy, a sense of self that he had lost over the years. In return, Daniel gave Max the love and care he had always deserved, finally providing him with a home where he could feel safe and appreciated for the hero that he was. As they walked through the quiet neighborhood together, Daniel couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the dog who had entered his life. What started as an unexpected rescue had blossomed into something far greater, a partnership that was changing both of their lives. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a soldier. And together, they were both finding their way back to a life worth living. Max's presence in Daniel's life had an immediate and profound effect. From the very beginning, it was clear that this was not just another dog being placed in a home. It was a protector, a healer, a constant source of support for someone who had carried the weight of war and trauma for far too long. In the first few days, Daniel was still adjusting to the idea of having Max by his side. He wasn't used to the comfort that a dog could provide. He had been too closed off, too distant for so long. But Max's calm presence was different. The dog never pushed, never demanded. He simply existed beside Daniel, as if he knew exactly what was needed. During one of the more difficult nights, when Daniel woke up in a cold sweat from a nightmare, he felt a familiar weight pressing against his chest. It was Max, who had crawled onto the bed and was gently resting his head on Daniel's shoulder. In the past, Daniel would have struggled with his panic, his heart racing as the remnants of the nightmare gripped him. But this time was different. With Max lying there, calm and unyielding, the panic seemed to subside. It was as if the dog's presence was a physical barrier to the overwhelming fear that often consumed Daniel. "Thanks, buddy," Daniel whispered into the night, his voice rough with emotion. Max didn't respond, but his eyes locked with Daniel's in a way that spoke volumes. This was their unspoken bond, one built on understanding, one that needed no words. Over the next few weeks, Daniel started to notice changes. He began to feel less afraid, less isolated. He would walk around the house at night without the usual hesitations, no longer checking every corner in fear of something lurking in the shadows. Max, walking just ahead, seemed to have an intuitive understanding of Daniel's needs. If Daniel's anxiety spiked, Max would immediately turn to him, nudging his hand with his nose, offering silent reassurance. On days when the anxiety seemed unbearable, Daniel found himself walking outside, Max beside him, as they made their way down the quiet street. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a slow walk in the cool morning air, but it was a victory. Daniel had spent years avoiding the outside world, hiding away in his home, but now, with Max by his side, he was able to take those small steps toward normalcy. Sleeping through the night without waking up from terrifying nightmares became another small victory. It was still a challenge, but with Max beside him, Daniel began to feel a sense of safety that he hadn't known in years. The dog's training, his calm demeanor, and his instinct to protect gave Daniel the space to heal, bit by bit. Max wasn't just a dog, he was a lifeline. And every day, he helped Daniel regain more of his lost confidence. He was the unspoken hero in Daniel's journey, the silent support that made it possible to step out of the shadows of fear and begin to live again. Sarah's life had gone on without Max, but the emptiness of his absence never truly left her. It wasn't just the silence in the house that bothered her, it was the constant nagging feeling that she had let go of something precious, something that had meant so much to her. Then one afternoon, as she was sorting through old photos of Max, she received a call from Daniel. Her heart skipped a beat when she heard his voice on the other end. "I just wanted to check in and thank you again," he said, his voice warm but tinged with emotion. "Max, he's been a real lifesaver." Sarah was quiet for a moment, unsure of what to say. Her heart ached as she imagined Max in his new home, with someone else. "I'm glad to hear he's helping you," she replied softly, her voice betraying her sadness. "He's more than that," Daniel continued. "I'm sleeping better, I'm not as anxious anymore. He's been my companion, my protector. I don't know what I would have done without him." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she listened. She hadn't realized just how much Max had meant to Daniel, how much of a difference he was making in his life. The dog she had thought she was giving up was now fulfilling a higher purpose, helping someone who had been broken in ways she couldn't fully understand. The realization hit Sarah like a wave. Max wasn't just a pet, it was never just about her. He had always been more than that. He had a deeper purpose, one that she couldn't have known until now. The stories Daniel shared, of the panic attacks that had been eased by Max's presence, of the nightmares that had been calmed by his gentle touch, made Sarah realize that her decision, painful as it had been the right one. "Thank you for giving him to me," Daniel said, his voice full of gratitude. "I can't explain it, but he's given me a second chance at life. I think I've finally found some peace." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. She had given Max the opportunity to continue his mission, to be the hero he had always been meant to be. She hadn't just given him away, she had helped him find a new purpose, a new family, and a new role that was so much bigger than she could have imagined. In that moment, Sarah understood that she hadn't lost Max. She had set him free, to be the protector, the healer, and the silent warrior that he had always been. The dog was fulfilling his legacy, just as she had hoped, and in a strange way that gave her peace. Max's journey wasn't just about helping Daniel, it was about them both healing together. Their connection, forged through shared trauma and struggle, grew stronger each day. As Max helped Daniel through his emotional battles, Daniel, in turn, began to offer Max something he hadn't had in years: patience, care, and love. Their mornings began to follow a familiar rhythm. Daniel would wake, still struggling with the echoes of the night, but Max was there, waiting by the door. There was no need for words. Max was ready to face the day with him, to help him through whatever came next. As they walked together, side by side, Max's presence was a calming force, reminding Daniel that he was not alone. In moments of panic, when Daniel's heart raced and his mind spiraled into fear, Max remained steady. The dog would sit beside him, pressing his body against Daniel's leg, grounding him in a way no therapy or medication could. With every step they took together, they learned to trust each other again. Daniel slowly allowed himself to be vulnerable with Max, to lean on him when the weight of his past became too much. Their unspoken connection deepened as the days passed. Max began to respond more instinctively, offering comfort when Daniel needed it the most. In the quiet moments, when they sat together on the porch or by the fire, there was a sense of peace that settled between them. They didn't need to speak, they simply understood each other. It wasn't just a one-sided healing process. As Daniel began to heal, Max also found a sense of comfort he had never known. The dog, who had spent years on the front lines of war, who had witnessed so much pain and loss, was finally able to let go of his own trauma. He found solace in Daniel's care, in the quiet moments of affection that Sarah had never fully been able to offer him. Max wasn't just a protector anymore. He was a partner, a companion, and a friend. And as their bond deepened, they began to heal in ways neither of them had thought possible. They were both broken in different ways, but together they were finding peace. Their journey was one of mutual understanding, patience, and love, an unspoken connection that no one else could ever understand. With every passing day, Max and Daniel grew stronger, their bond a testament to the healing power of trust and loyalty. What had started as a rescue had turned into something much greater, a partnership of two wounded souls, finding their way back to each other and to a life worth living. Through their shared journey of healing, they had become more than just dog and owner. They had become family. Sarah stood by the window, gazing out at the horizon where the fading light of the day met the rolling hills. The house felt empty now, quieter without Max, Rex, as he was now known. But even in that emptiness, there was a certain peace. A peace that had been hard-won through pain, confusion, and eventual understanding. Looking back on the decision to sell him, Sarah knew it had been the hardest thing she had ever done. The weight of it had sat heavily on her heart from the moment she first placed that ad. The idea of parting with a dog who had been by her side through so many of life's trials felt like a betrayal. Yet now, as she reflected on it, she understood. She understood that the true act of love was not in keeping him close for her own comfort, but in allowing him to fulfill his greater purpose. Max had been her companion, yes, but he was always meant for more. He had been trained to protect, to heal, and to serve, and when she let him go, she allowed him to continue that journey, one that would impact someone else's life in ways she could never have imagined. It was no longer just about the dog she had loved. It was about the healing he was offering someone else, someone who needed him in ways Sarah could not provide. In the quiet of the evening, as Sarah thought about the memories they had shared, the walks, the comforting presence, the quiet understanding, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had given him the life he needed, and in return, he had helped her through her own struggles. She had made the right decision. Now, there was no more sorrow. Instead, there was acceptance. The decision had been painful, but it was a necessary part of both her journey and Max's. She had done the right thing, not just for herself, but for Max, and for the person who now had the chance to experience the kind of healing that only a dog like him could provide. As Sarah stood there, the cool evening air brushing against her skin, she couldn't help but think about the new chapter Max was living. The dog's journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun in a way that Sarah had never imagined. She had once thought of Max as a loyal companion, a dog who would stay by her side forever. But now, she realized that his purpose was bigger than just one life. Max had been meant to heal those who had seen too much, those who had been broken by war, by trauma, by pain. He had been trained for this role long before Sarah had ever met him. And now, he was fulfilling that role in ways Sarah could never have provided. The thought of Max helping Daniel, of him being the key to his recovery, filled her with a sense of pride. The dog was no longer just a pet to her. It was a hero, a partner in healing, and a source of comfort and protection for someone who needed it desperately. Sarah took solace in knowing that the love she had shared with Max was now part of something greater. The dog was making an impact far beyond what she had imagined. For Sarah, the act of letting go had not only changed Max's life, it had changed her own. She had found healing in the selflessness of her decision. She had given him up, yes, but in doing so, she had allowed him to do what he was truly meant to do. And in return, she had healed herself, knowing that love sometimes means sacrifice, and sacrifice leads to growth. As the sun began to set, casting its golden light across the land, Sarah found a new sense of purpose. She had played a role in something far bigger than herself. Max was now helping someone else find peace, just as he had once helped her. It was a bittersweet ending, but it was one filled with hope, for both Max and for her. The story of Sarah and Max is a testament to the deep, often unspoken bond that exists between humans and animals. It's a bond that transcends simple companionship, one built on trust, loyalty, and unconditional love. But sometimes, love isn't about keeping someone close. It's about knowing when to let go. The decision to let go is never easy. It requires strength, courage, and a deep understanding of what's truly best for the ones we love. In Sarah's case, letting go of Max wasn't a surrender. It was an act of love, of letting him fulfill his true purpose, even if it meant parting with him. In doing so, she gave him the opportunity to heal someone else, to continue his legacy as a protector, a healer, and a hero. This story reminds us that love can mean sacrifice. It shows us that sometimes, the most selfless thing we can do is to release someone or something we cherish, to allow them to grow and fulfill their potential. Max, in this case, was not just a dog. He was a life changer, a silent hero making a difference in the world. Even in moments of heartache and loss, there is always room for growth, healing, and new beginnings. Sarah's journey wasn't just about letting go of Max. It was about finding peace in knowing that love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes, it means helping someone else take the next step toward healing, even if it means stepping back. And so, Max's journey continues, as does Sarah's, both of them, forever changed by the bond they shared and the love they gave even from afar.